Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Robert. Robert, for everyone out there listening who might not know who you are, they're missing out, but could you please introduce yourself to everybody? Let them know what you're interested in and what you focus on.
Sure. My name is Bob Stickgold. I'm a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and I study sleep, memory, and dreams. And most of my last 25 years, I've spent exploring how sleep benefits our memories, how sleep actively processes our memories, and how dreaming is part of that memory processing too.
Why did you pick that in particular to focus on? Do you like dreams? I mean, a lot of people talk about they don't really remember their dreams, and it kind of seems like dreams to me are like a movie in a sense. Whenever I dream, I sleep probably 30 minutes to an hour at like the longest, but those dreams that I have during those times are the most intense and they feel like they last years.
So that's part of the reason I do love dreams, and I'm fascinated by them. I always have been, back to my childhood. And then the whole question of function of sleep, all the other major physiological drives, thirst, hunger, sexual desire, we've known the biological functions they serve for thousands of years. I mean, we're thirsty because if we don't take in enough liquid, we dehydrate and die. We get hungry because if we don't eat enough food, we starve to death. But why do we sleep? I mean, as recently as just the turn of the century, Ellen Hobson was quoted as saying, the only known function of sleep is to cure sleepiness. So it was this real black hole that we knew nothing about the function of.
Why do you think
I like that?
Well, why do you think nobody was really focused in the study of sleep? I mean, at least there hasn't been a lot of known news towards it. It just seems like society's not aimed towards sleep. It seems like it's always like get to your next step, get to your next process. It's a fast-paced society, even though everyone sleeps.
Also, there's two parts. It's why have scientists ignored it, and where's the populace ignore it? The populace ignores it because, unlike breathing, if you don't breathe for about 5 minutes, you're dead. If you don't take any liquid in for 4 or 5 days, you're dead. But sleep, it's not obvious that you need it. I mean, you feel sleepy if you don't, but you can go with it. You can pull an all-nighter. You can pull 2 all-nighters in a row, and all you do is you get more sleepy. So it's not obvious to people. It's not obvious that sleep serves any function. And if it doesn't serve a function, it's like that little bumper sticker, you can sleep when you're dead. Right? It's like, why think about it if it doesn't do anything? For scientists, it's a slightly different question. We didn't have a handle into function. Really back in the 1900s. I mean, right up to 2000, sleep researchers were just sort of waving their arms, saying, "Well, it must serve an important function," but not able to figure out what it was. It's more subtle than it is for things like eating and drinking and sex.
Is it because I would say really when you get to see kind of it take wear on you is more of like a long-term effect, not really short-term. Like if you don't sleep a couple of days, you're going to be tired those couple of days. But when you look at the long-term health effects compared to, if you are thirsty or you're hungry, those are immediate. Those are something that you notice right then and there. Sleep just seems like, oh, I'll get sleep tomorrow. I'll get sleep the day after. But even then, if someone gets an hour or two, eventually after a week or a month of doing that, I notice I have my crashes. Like there'll be moments I won't sleep, but then there'll be a day where I just need a full day just to lay down and not do anything. I could sleep the whole day if I felt like it.
Yeah, well, it is clearly true that if you don't sleep at all, you'll die from it. But it'll take a month and a half, 2 months before you do, and nobody can ever last that long. So you cannot drink and you cannot eat volitionally. You can decide, I'm not going to drink anything and not drink anything. You can decide, I'm not going to eat anything and not eat anything. You decide you're not going to sleep and you fall asleep. That's why, back in the Civil War, if a guard fell asleep on duty, the punishment was execution, summary execution, and they still fell asleep because at some point your brain takes over and puts you to sleep and you can't control it. So nobody ever goes long enough without sleep, except in some rare genetic mutations. Nobody ever goes long enough without sleep to show the final, lethal consequences of it. But we see the other consequences all the time and we ignore them. So forgive me.
What type of consequences though? Because if we talk about like, I feel like maybe society's just not really worried about getting it, or tends to put that on the last of their care needs list, besides the people who do love it, because they don't see the actual effects of what's happening around them.
Absolutely. So the effect that they experience is just being tired, being foggy, not running on all cylinders, being a little slow, not being able to find words, driving one place and ending up somewhere else. I mean, all these things that you sort of giggle and say, oh man, I must really be tired. But it seems to be a price that people are willing to pay. I'm not quite sure why. I tell people how, you go off on a vacation and you're out on a vacation for a couple of weeks and you come back and you feel like you're 10 times more effective and 10 times more efficient, and your thinking is 10 times faster than it was before you went on vacation. I said, that's not because you relaxed. It's because you finally caught up on your sleep debt. So we just sort of slowly sink into this place that we forget that people used to do just fine without coffee.
Well, yeah, caffeine just runs society though. Even if people, that's a weird thing because I had a coffee before we started this, and I wouldn't say I really get a stimulant from caffeine. I kind of just like it for the taste, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just programmed in. I mean, it's so easily accessible, especially if you have it in your house. It's like a natural thing for a lot of people just to pour a cup of coffee, but I don't think they realize the damage that they're doing.
So here's an interesting fact. After oil, caffeine is the second largest dollar amount commodity on the world trade market. It's oil and then caffeine. We go to wars over oil. I suspect we might be willing to go to wars over caffeine too, because the society is so totally dependent on it. And they just think of it as, sure, I got to eat, I got to drink, I have to have my caffeine. These are the necessities of life. But it's all the caffeine is just to mask the effects of not getting enough sleep.
So would you say that society has a sleep kind of, I wouldn't say, I'm not going to say, I would say it's definitely a
Say it, say
deficit.
it.
It's definitely a deficit, but do you think society like has a sleep issue? Maybe just not a healthy relationship with it. It seems like a lot
Oh,
of people don't
yes.
understand it.
Oh, yeah. Bill Gates once famously said that his programmers are so tough and so dedicated that if they have a deadline coming up, they can program 72 hours straight with no sleep. And I say, yeah, the product is Windows. I mean, this is what we see, right? I mean, they program it 72 hours straight and they end up producing a product that's so buggy, everybody hates it. But they don't even recognize that that's the sleep problem.
Huh.
You look frozen.
No,
You're not.
I'm not frozen. I'm just
I'm sorry.
no, I was just soaking in what you're saying. Cause see, when I think of sleep, I think of the emotional response that really is a benefit in a sense. When we talk about sleep, if you ever feel like you're flustered, you ever feel like you're just angry at life, or everything's too much, especially with the rise of depression and mental health today, take a nap.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I take a nap, all that stress, all that anxiety, it just goes away. I feel like a new refreshed person. I'm like, why was I so upset thinking that life was just unbearable? Now I'm like, I'm feeling better. I'm able to function. I'm able to think. I'm able to speak. I'm able to have actual friendly interactions. I mean, half the time people are walking around angry at life and they're exhausted in a sense. But when they say I'm exhausted, that they don't realize the full length of where that goes. I mean, if they take a nap and wake up, they're going to love life a little bit better. They're going to be able
Yeah.
to enjoy it as much.
Matt Walker, who's out at UC Berkeley, has actually done studies where he shows that after people have slept, if you show them faces that are more or less angry or happy, they rate them as happier than they do when they're sleep deprived. Even late in a regular day, they'll start ranking faces as more angry and less happy. And you give those people a nap, and the world looks bright again. My mother used to say, tomorrow's another day. Things will look different in the morning.
Yeah.
And that's one of the benefits of sleep, that it re-regulates our emotional systems.
So what's I would say maybe a way that you can tell people out there listening and also myself to be able to kind of prioritize sleep over a lot of other things as well too. Not saying that it needs to take number one position, but it should definitely be ranked up in the top five at least. It just seems like I said before, society doesn't really, I don't think, understand the full capabilities of what sleep can do for them. So I'm curious, through your research or through your work, what experiments or what observations have you done to be able to kind of sort out, oh, this is a prime importance as well too?
So the simple thing I say to people, if you don't get enough sleep, you're going to end up sick, fat, and stupid. And those are three of the benefits that you get from sleep. If you happen to have pulled an all-nighter the night before you got your COVID vaccination, your body only produced half as much antibody to COVID than it would have if you had gotten 6 to 8 hours of sleep the night before. So yes, you get sick. If you go 4 or 5 days on only 4 hours of sleep a night, you will start to look pre-diabetic. Your insulin regulation will go off and your weight will start going up. And if you're not getting enough sleep and your brain doesn't have the time to process the new information you took in the day before, you lose a lot of the benefit of that information. It becomes easier for you to forget it the next day if you haven't slept, but also you don't manage to extract the meaning of it. There's a difference between being smart, which is having a lot of information, and being wise, which is knowing how to use that information. And you get smart during the day, but you get wise in your sleep. Your brain is literally working the entire night to take the new information you've taken in that day and deciding what to keep, what to forget, how to file the information you took in, whether you file this podcast under NPR or whether you filed under sleep or you file it under learning, how you file it, because how you file a memory determines how in the future you end up being able to use it. Dan Schachter at Harvard says that memory is not about the past, it's about the future. It's about giving you the tools you need to function better in the future. And when you come into a situation in your life, whether it's a big one, like some life-threatening thing, or just some small one, like trying to decide whether it's safe to cross the street at this point, you have to go to your memories to decide what the answer is and how to act. And if those memories aren't filed properly, you won't find them. It's like a book out of place in the library. And that filing is done while you sleep. That's one of the things sleep does. It'll take a bunch of new information. It'll extract the gist of the information and lock that gist into your memory. If you're learning a new complex process, you'll actually be physically faster at doing it the next day because your brain has consolidated that memory. It'll discover rules and what's going on around you. If you are talking to a bunch of different people about a new topic and they all seem to have some way they talk about it that you don't quite get, you'll wake up in the morning and you'll have gotten it overnight. All of that happens while you sleep.
Besides, it wasn't there a study that people who sleep less actually have a more likely capability of like not mental health, but like Alzheimer's, like issues with memory loss and stuff correlating with their brain.
So another thing that happens while we sleep that's only been discovered quite recently and is quite fascinating is your brain cleans itself while you sleep. It literally washes out all the garbage in your brain, all the proteins that have been released from cells in your brain as waste products. Those get washed out through the cerebral spinal fluid while you're asleep. And it's those proteins collecting outside of the cells that are the cause of Alzheimer's disease. So you're probably at higher risk for Alzheimer's if you're not getting enough sleep at night.
Yeah, I'm curious. Have you seen any different changes during the pandemic? Like when the start of it was, it seemed like a lot of people were staying home, which I bet in that first 2 weeks when everyone was just inside their house was probably like they got amazing sleep just because all the people that were working every single day, barely sleeping as it was, got to really just sit around and sleep. But then it seemed like it threw a lot of sleeping patterns off as well too. There were people that were, they would stay up all night and then they would sleep all day. And then it seemed like a bunch of clocks started shifting. I know plenty of my friends who, when they went back to work, picked up night shifts because they would sleep during the day because the pandemic had thrown them into some type of video
Yeah,
game all nighter. And next, they would spend all day sleeping. So now their whole sleep schedule was off. They couldn't return back to their day jobs.
yeah, I don't actually know of studies about that, but I can tell you, I've noticed that too. And it's a little bit like, you're too young to know this, but it's a little bit like when your kids go off to college. Your kids go off to college and there's no one saying, be home by 11 or be home by 12 or get out of bed, you got to be at school in 45 minutes. And they start getting completely dysregulated. My older daughter was a kid who in high school went to bed between 10:30 and 11 every night, 5 days a week. By midnight on the weekend, she went off to MIT, and I called her a month later at something like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I said, you sound funny. She said, oh, I just got out of bed. You woke me up. I said, Jesse, it's 1 o'clock. She said, yeah, well, yeah, sometimes I'm getting up at 1 o'clock. Sometimes I'm going to bed at 4 in the afternoon. I mean, it all depends on how long I stay up at night. And they're just completely free running. They seem to have lost that circadian control for some reason. Um, and I think the pandemic did that to people too. I think it completely threw their schedules off because they become used to external forces limiting their sleep schedule.
Yeah.
You know, had to be in the office by 9 or you got in trouble with the boss. If you got to be at home, you've got to be in the office by 9. You got to be up before 8. If you got to be up before 8, you got to be in bed around midnight. And that sort of constrained their wake sleep cycle. But now it's probably just starting to slide back towards that. But certainly early in the pandemic, when people were truly working from home, um, they started free running like a rat in a dark place that gets no light at all to control its circadian rhythms. I'm wondering whether it might have also been because people were not going outside, so they weren't getting as much light to help their brain. Normally the light cycle keeps your brain locked into something like a 10 to 10 o'clock or midnight bedtime. But when there's no big differences in light between day and night, if you have your lights on in your house, then you lose that circadian control as well. And then you start free running. You start running at a slightly longer than 24-hour day.
Well, just because I would say it's impossible to always be on like a regular sleep schedule, just with how the way life goes, whether it's work, whether it's just something you end up missing an hour, you don't feel tired, you can't go to sleep. Where would you say like maybe a problem is where it starts? Is it in early development? Because the school thing, for instance, kids had to get up at 6 a.m. to go to school. And I know not everyone's the same. They can't get up at 6 a.m. For me, I'm at my gym at 4:30 in the morning every single day. So I like working out first thing in the morning. I wake up at midnight. If I try and be in bed about like 8 p.m., but I only sleep maybe 20-minute bursts and for only a couple of hours. The next thing you know, I'm off doing something. My brain just won't shut off. If you look back in actually the beginning of my podcast, you'll see I have giant bags under my eyes, and I actually have gotten better sleep than I used to, only because I had anxiety that was telling me, don't go to bed. You have things you need to be doing, like getting podcast guests or doing whatever I needed to be doing at that moment. And I feel like not everyone's the same. So not everyone's going to function off of a routine sleep schedule. But I wonder where that starts, because now that kind of start thinking about it, I don't think that waking up at 6 a.m. or being to school at 7 for every single kid is a really good blanket fit. I mean, I know you need to go to school and everything as well too, but it just becomes, I feel like that's where we start to kind of lose track a little bit, because there's a lot of people out there, and it's always been the term of like a 9 to 5 work style. You work 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that's for a lot of people's jobs as well, too. But then there's the late night shift people. But then in society, like average people that like to be at work during the day, look at them like they're weirdos because they like to like work really, really late at night and then sleep all day. It's like you have two mixed groups of people here. So I'm wondering where it starts. I'm wondering if this is like how just people are. I understand, like you can probably see it best with when someone travels, when they have that like time change. If there's a 6 hour difference, they're supposed to be in bed, but it's the middle of the day somewhere. It's the end of the afternoon or something. That that's noticeable. But when we look at the world and how people are all sleeping at different times and functioning differently depending on what their individual lifestyles are, you start to wonder, sleep's not being put on the priority of society. I don't think it's people necessarily intending to do that. I think it's just the way that society has been built, and sleep happens to be one of the last things on the totem pole.
Yeah, well, the Industrial Revolution brought about factories, and factories brought about the factory whistle. The factory whistle was the first alarm clock in the world, because for the first time, large numbers of people all had to show up at the factory at work at the same time. Before that, if you had a store in town, you opened the store when you got up and you closed it at the end of the day. And if you didn't get up until 11, you didn't open your store until 11. And if you were the butcher, someone was annoyed because they came by at 9 and you weren't there, but they were used to that, so they came back later. And everybody, there were no alarm clocks, so you could only go by your own clock. And that worked fine. It worked fine for millions of years, as a matter of fact. But as society became more regimented, starting with those factories, then we started imposing sleep schedules on people. It's well known that when kids hit adolescence, there is a biological shift in their clock. So their clock shifts later. For an adolescent to go to bed at 10:30 is about as easy for the average person to go to bed at 8:30. And if you ever try to go to bed at 8:30 in the evening, it doesn't work. Your body just won't let you go to sleep. You've got a peak of circadian activation and it's keeping you awake because evolution has said you don't want to be going to bed this soon. So all those high school kids who drag themselves into school in the morning and sleep through their first period class, that's biology. That's biology that the society chooses to ignore. I mean, all those high schools should be starting at 10 a.m. You shouldn't be getting up at 6 a.m. You should be getting up at 8 or 9 a.m. And you knew that, but you thought that you were a slacker because your parents told you were a slacker because you had trouble getting up that early. So that's the normative case where society refuses to deal with the reality of our biology. But there's also massive individual differences. Some people's clocks run a little bit faster than 24 hours, some run a little bit slower than 24 hours. And so you get what we call owls and larks, people who function better in the morning because their clock is running a little bit fast, or people who function better late at night because their clock is running a little bit slower. So there's all of that. And then our sleep needs, total amounts do vary. I mean, some people need less sleep than others. Now, I will say that the way you describe yourself, you are an extreme outlier. And I'd love to get you fit up with something that would monitor your actual sleep. Because if you're only getting 2 hours of sleep total a night, or in a 24-hour cycle, you're probably in the shortest 0.1%. And we're not even sure we believe you can live that way. So it might be that you're napping more than you realize. It might be that you're napping more than you count, or it might be that you're a true extreme outlier.
The way I've been explained to it by sleep scientists is that I might be hitting in like a rare, I would say, REM cycle. And the way that she said it was that I might just, because when I take my sleeps, they're literally an hour. Like I've been like that since I was a little kid. Now I do have ADHD. I don't know if that plays a factor in it as well too.
It plays a factor, but not that much.
Well,
So
I don't know. I've been whenever I do hit that hour, if I go to bed at 10 p.m. and then I wake up at 11 p.m., that hour of sleep, I mean, I'll get up like like it's the next day and I slept the whole day basically, like getting my ready for work. I remember someone stopping me before I left my house, like, "What are you doing? It's 11 o'clock at night." I'm like, "What?" Like you're in a daze, like your brain doesn't feel like it's on. You're basically on autopilot. But then like
Mhm.
whenever I do get sleep, I don't know. I feel groggy. Even the more sleep I get, I just feel like I've somehow switched my cycle to a point where I'm at a point now where if I do get sleep, I feel like I run slower.
It is true that if you are quite sleep deprived and then get less than enough sleep, your brain, doesn't want to get back up. I mean, think about someone who hasn't had anything to drink for 24 hours, 36 hours, and you give them a half cup of water, right? And they drink it, and it's like, God, I feel more thirsty now than I did before. And it's sort of like that with sleep too. If you're severely sleep deprived and then you just get a short amount of sleep, a nap classically, you will wake up feeling worse than when you went to sleep because your brain does not want to wake back up. It sounds like that's how you feel.
Yeah, and sometimes during those naps, if I get up, even if I went like usually after I eat, I get like I'm ready for a nap or something like that. But
Mhm.
if I eat and then I get that nap or that sleep, I would say, and then I wake up, I'm starving. Like it's like I didn't even eat. It's like I hadn't eaten in like 24 hours. I have no idea what that is. That's just something that my body kicks up into some, I guess, that REM cycle that you talk about.
Well, it's not about REM. It's about sleep, and sleep and hunger share neuromodulators in the brain. So they're related to each other. The main neurotransmitter in the brain that regulates your immediate sleep onset and offset is called orexin. And orexin was originally thought to be an eating regulator because it does in fact regulate eating. I remember one time going down to Washington from Boston for a demonstration in college, and my roommate saying he was too tired to eat and too hungry to sleep. So there's this funny link between them. So you finally get that hour of sleep, and then you're hungry again. That's not surprising.
Now, could this like for society, I would say, with the amount of sleep that it seems like people are getting, would you say, do you think people are getting more sleep or do you think people are getting less sleep compared to maybe 10, 15 years ago?
Compared to 20 years ago, we're getting less. We're getting less sleep, and we're getting less sleep because we have come up with new, more exciting ways. I mean, we're gaming, right? We're gaming. We're binge watching. When I was a kid, you know, the television stations shut off their transmitters at about midnight. They just, they didn't broadcast after midnight. There was nothing to watch on TV after midnight. I remember as a kid getting up on Saturday mornings at like 6:30 or 7 and turning the TV on. And all you get are test patterns because they weren't broadcasting anything yet. So, with the internet doing what it's done on us in the last 20 years, um, there's a lot more exciting things to do. And so people just stay up later. Here's a way to think about it, okay? Do you know why 12 o'clock at night is called midnight?
Because the middle of the night.
It is the middle of the night. Most people think of it as somewhere around the start of the night, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we've got bright lights on in our homes all evening. But midnight is literally the middle of the night. It's halfway between when the sun sets and when the sun rises. It depends where you are in the time zone, but midnight is the middle of the night. And we have, as a world culture, pushed that hours and hours later. So we now stay up hours and hours past the point where biologically, historically, we would go to bed. And that's fine if we sleep in. There's nothing wrong with going to bed at midnight and getting up at 8. There's not even anything horribly wrong was going to bed at 2 and getting up at 10. But my son, who's a high school senior, will stay up gaming with his buddies until 2. And then he's up at 7 to get ready for school that starts at 8:30. He's not getting enough sleep. And he's falling asleep in first period class. He's coming home and saying he feels exhausted. He's complaining that he can't seem to remember anything that he learns during class. And that's because, he's cut his night short on both ends and isn't getting enough sleep. So yes, as a society, we're probably getting an hour less sleep than we were, certainly than we were 50 years ago, maybe even an hour less than we were getting 25 years ago.
I would like to see a study done where someone just walks out into the middle of like a neighborhood and in the middle of the night just checks how many lights are on in people's homes. And if those people are up, I feel like a lot of times people, they go to bed with the light on now. I don't know where that went,
Oh,
where usually people sleep in complete darkness at times, but then kids had night lights as well too. But how many people leave a light on in the kitchen, leave a light on in the foyer, leave a light on wherever? There's lights that
no.
are on sometimes. I sleep with my light on in my room sometimes.
Why?
I don't know. I'm just lazy, don't want to get up and turn it off. I'm not afraid of the
So,
dark or anything.
yeah. That would be a good reason, actually, to leave it on. So it turns out that even 20 years ago, the average person had no communication devices in their bedroom. They might have had an FM radio or an AM radio in their bedroom, but that was it. 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Then they got an extension phone in their bedroom. And that wasn't so bad. But if you go into your average high schooler's bedroom now, they have 5 or 6 telecommunication devices. They've got a cell phone. They might have a landline. They've got a television. They've got a phone that's an internet phone. They've got a computer. They have all these different ways they connect to the outside world in their bedroom. And all of those, they're teases, High school kids, a lot of high school kids go to sleep with their phone in their bed on silent so that when they get a call, it doesn't wake up their parents, it just buzzes. But the culture now seems to be, if you have a friend who texts you at 2 in the morning, you have to reply, which means that you're lying there in bed and you've told you've told your brain that it has to stay alert enough to wake up if it feels the vibration or hears the vibration of a phone sitting next to them. And that's disastrous because they don't sleep as deeply. They don't get as much of that, what scientists call slow wave sleep, deep sleep, which is where in adolescence you release 90% of your growth hormone. If you're not getting slow wave sleep, you're not getting growth hormone. You're not going to grow taller. And the brain is staying hyper alert so that they can wake up. So we have all these distractions in our bedroom now. So probably they're falling asleep with the light on because they were watching TV until they fell asleep, because they were gaming until they fell asleep.
I would like to see the average person's excuse of why they don't sleep enough.
First, you have to find out whether they'll agree that they don't sleep enough.
I think everyone can kind of agree that they probably don't sleep enough. If they give you the answer that, like, I think I sleep okay, yeah, then you know that they're not doing it the best.
Right. Or as a friend once told me, I used to need 8 hours of sleep a night, but then, Starbucks came out with its grande. And now I only need 6 hours of sleep.
Dude, I
So
could drink a pot of coffee and go right to bed, man.
Yeah. So I tell people, if you can imagine sleeping at night with no alarm clock and not worry about getting to work on time because you'll wake up in time. If your roommates or partner or co-workers are willing to talk to you before you've had a cup of coffee in the morning, then probably you're getting enough sleep. But if you need that alarm clock, and if you hit the snooze alarm twice, and if you get up and have 2 cups of coffee in the morning, then you're self-medicating for not having enough sleep. And I think I think that's true for a huge proportion of the population. I
Yeah.
think as people get older, they probably give up the fight against getting enough sleep. But certainly people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, I think you're right. I think very few of them are getting enough sleep. And they don't see the side effects. They might get more colds, they might put on some weight, but they don't attribute that to sleep.
I have a pretty good immune system, but I'm also like in the fitness industry. So, like I said, I got interested in sleep not only because of my lack of it, but also because I know the benefits of it. But what I started noticing is when I can really sleep a good 8 hours, or I could really crash, because I'll hit walls, like it'll be 5 p.m. or something, and I'll feel like I'm in mud. Like I just need to pass out right now. But even then, it's only for an hour. But if I work out twice, so what I do is I usually work out at 4:30 in the morning, do like a weightlifting session or something for an hour and a half or so. But then I started going like back to the gym again around 6 p.m. and I would do 4 hours of cardio. So at 10 p.m. I crashed and then woke up at 4 a.m. Like I could sleep all the way through that. But there's like that's not manageable if you're trying to live a life and do other things as well too, have a job, and it's just depressing to do those types of things. But usually I'll work out, like, I'll do a late night cardio session on the weekends for about 4 hours or something. I know it's excessive, I've been told before, but it for me, that gets me the best sleep, because as soon as I get home, if it's like 4 a.m. and I just did it from midnight to 4 a.m., I could crash and I could sleep till 11. It's a Saturday. It doesn't matter. I don't have to get up, but I get good functional sleep where I wake up and I'm like, oh, I feel great. I can go out and do things. But I feel like not only devices cause an issue in people's lives now, there's also like this advertising that social media has done into our brains, like some way hardwired into a lot of people's heads, that when they're on it, they just start scrolling and don't know what they're scrolling for. They just keep on going and going and going. And also, it's the time consumption for me. Like, I think that's for a lot of people my age. There's this mentality of hustle and grinding, but you can't do that if you haven't had your hours. But a lot of people are like, I need to sacrifice more hours of sleep so I can go and do the things I need to be doing to make my life more successful. And that's when we start having an issue. It's kind of backwards in a sense. You should be getting more sleep to be more productive, but in a sense, people are willing to lose sleep to be more productive.
Right. It's, I tell students that, I teach at Harvard, and I say, if you're on the football team and the coach says, you know what, we need to get more practice time in, you guys, so we're cutting out dinner. We're going to save an hour by just cutting out dinner completely.
Wait for the woke mob to take them out.
What do you mean? You just won't eat dinner. You have breakfast, you have lunch, just the same as always. We're just cutting dinner out so you can practice an extra hour. They'll all look at him appropriately like he's crazy. They say, we can't be athletes if we don't eat our dinners. What are you talking about? But if he says, we're going to cut 2 hours out of your sleep so you can get more practice in, they'll say, okay, if that's what we need to do. And it makes no more sense than cutting out dinner. But we have been trained to believe that sleep is unnecessary, that sleep is a luxury, if you will. It's because we don't see the benefit of it.
Well, what's that quote? I'll sleep when I'm dead. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can see a little bit of it when you look at the fact that car accidents go up something like 25 or 50% the day after the spring shift to daylight savings time. Everybody just losing that 1 hour of sleep at night, just that 1 hour, right? You set the clock forward from 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. Nobody really notices. But car accidents go up dramatically. No one says, oh, yeah, I'm sorry I hit you. They changed the clock last night. They don't put it together. So it's like smoking used to be. Nobody saw a downside from smoking, except maybe they had a little bit of a cough. Mm-hmm. They didn't notice that all their friends were dying of lung cancer. They didn't put it together. It's like drinking and driving, where everybody knows it's unsafe for other people to drink and drive, but they think that they can drink and drive. And they think they can get by on 6 hours of sleep. Well, you can get by, on 6 hours of sleep, just like you can probably drive home safely, well, drive home without an accident if you're totally plastered. But you don't want to be doing that every night, right?
Yeah,
It's just
you shouldn't
not,
be doing it at all.
you shouldn't be doing it even one night, because that could be the night. And it's the same thing with sleep. You can cut it back, but it has a cost, and it's visible in the lab. We can see it in performance on tests. We can see it on performance on strength tests even. But you feel it. You feel your mind getting foggy, and you say, "Oh, I need a cup of coffee," and you don't. You need an hour of sleep.
What do you
I
think?
used to say,
Well, I was going to
"Tell
ask,
me."
what do you think about society evolving to where it might not need as much sleep as we initially thought? Like they always said 8 hours, but if I'm an abnormality, or if I'm a person that just happens to be a way outlier, when does that become the normal? It seems like with the amount of sacrifice, it only takes what we said earlier about back in the day during the Industrial Revolution, all these changes that were happening in people's sleep schedules and all these types of things. If we lead into an amount of people that don't, they cause to lose sleep after a couple of generations of people, you're going to start probably seeing like an adaptation or some type of change, right?
Well, those changes usually take a few thousand years at least. I mean, if
Speed
you're
it up.
talking evolution,
Yeah.
if we can get Robbie, to be the sole father of all of the next generation,
Well, Attila the Hun, what am I?
then you can move it fast. But the rate at which evolution changes is very slow. And that's assuming that there is a reproductive and survival benefit for what you're doing. I mean, people who are short sleepers will often ascribe their professional success to the fact that they're short sleepers. But there's no evidence that that's true.
Yeah, but can't you brainwash a society to think that you don't need sleep, and sleep's just something you can do when you're dead? It seems like that's all we've done. 5-hour energies, caffeine commercials,
Yep, yep,
motivational speakers saying that you
yep.
don't need sleep.
But that, if we think about it this, if we told people that it was really cool to be taller, okay? If we really broadcast the fact that something like 90% of all presidential elections in the US were won by the taller candidate, if we really got everybody to understand that in job interviews, being taller gives you an advantage, do you think people would get taller?
Yeah,
I
but
mean, you can't just.
that's different though. That's so different. Just because for to being tall, I mean, that's a good example. I'm not going to lie, but I start looking at a concept of like they have supplements, whether it's a placebo effect or not. They have these types of things out there that will. I mean, everything's shoved in your face as an energy booster. Most cans of Coke, Pepsi, anything of that sort has a little bit of
Absolutely.
caffeine in it. So if that does have an effect,
Absolutely.
that's like if I just advertised platform shoes to everyone and made it more optional for you to be able to wear platform shoes, you would
Well,
essentially get taller.
I mean, that's what women a generation ago did. They did 4-inch heels, right?
I think of
And the
Kiss. I think
only
of Kiss. That's all I think of.
and it was only to be taller, or primarily. There's something about the shape it puts on your legs, but mostly it was to be taller. But it didn't make people taller. And we can do all sorts of things to convince people they don't need as much sleep. And we can use all sorts of medications, caffeine primarily, but there's others that work. You can use amphetamines to help you stay awake more. There are other medications that'll keep you awake more, and they will make it possible for you to stay awake and alert with less sleep, but it won't decrease the amount of sleep your brain needs, and it won't decrease the amount of sleep your body needs. It'll just make it less obvious. It'll stop the drive to sleep, but not the need for it. It's like you could cure hunger in a poor community by giving them lots of amphetamines, and then they wouldn't feel hungry anymore, but they'd still be malnourished. So it's the same thing. So if your question is, has advertising pushed our culture to the point where people in general believe they should get less sleep and do more caffeine to ameliorate the pain of not getting enough sleep? I think that's already happened. I think that's already been done. But we're not going to change the amount of sleep people need, not for their brain health, not for their body health.
What about I bet you could probably wake up society a little bit if you were able to somehow pinpoint every single every single major disaster that we've ever had on the basis of someone missing a calculation. I brought up all the time. You hear businesses that go under, you hear some incidences that happen or crazy things that go on. Was that a person that was thinking clearly? More likely than not, a lot of like Wall Street stuff or anything where you see a major deal slip through or they lose their business or something. They go, I missed a step or I cut a corner. Well, you cut a corner probably because you weren't thinking it through. I mean, how many people actually think things through before they do them? A lot of people don't. It seems like society's running on autopilot right now. I'm just curious to where do you think, if you were going to pinpoint on a map, where do you think people would be going when it comes to societal? Do you think that the lack of sleep deprivation is eventually going to catch up with people, or do you think that
I think
eventually people wake up to it?
I think the pendulum is starting to swing back. I see, because now when I go to my PCP for my annual physical, he asks me how I'm sleeping. He asks me how much sleep am I getting. It's now considered a medical question, which it didn't used to be. We see it in a lot of different ways. We see schools trying to adapt their start times to acknowledge that high school students biologically are shifted to a later time scale. And we see it just in the media. We see a lot in the media now about the need for sleep, how to get better sleep. So I think it's starting to shift. You know, there was a point when the Harvard School of Public Health got together with the Ed School and tried to figure out what to do about all the drunk driving. And they pinpointed the problem as people going to bars and driving there. And they came up with this term. They invented the term designated driver. And they got that term from baseball, where you have a designated hitter who bats for the pitcher.
Yeah.
And he's a powerhouse. And he's an incredibly powerful and important person on the team. And no one says, oh, he's the dedicated hitter because he can't even play right field.
Mm-hmm.
It's a positive thing. And so just coming up with that name so that the guy who is at the bar with you who isn't drinking is not thought of as the loser, but is thought of as a designated driver who's actually doing everybody else a potentially life-saving favor. Just coming up with that phrase was enough to have a massive impact on that culture of drunk driving. So we need something like that. Chuck Seisler has said people should get in their minds that that we should change our alarm clock so they go off when it's time to go to bed, not when it's time to get up. The Apple phone will, if you ask it to, start to shut itself down and tell you it's time to go to bed at a time of your choice. Or your computer can prompt you that it thinks it's time to go into sleep mode because it's 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So there's an acknowledgement that these things are getting out of hand. And so maybe it's starting to shift back. But yeah, it's not just letting them know about the accidents. We can give them those lists, and they're kind of, I think people sort of snicker at them. There's Chernobyl was probably a sleep deprivation effect. Do you remember the flight that was shot down by the Russians? I think it was a Japan airline flight that was shot down by the Russians when it strayed into Soviet airspace.
Yeah.
While flying across the Pacific. That was a sleep deprivation effect. It was a double sleep deprivation effect. First, The pilot had forgot to reset his GPS when he flew over Alaska. So his GPS system was off. And that was the main cause of the problem. But the sleepiness problem was more than that, because he was talking to another pilot on another flight that was just an hour ahead of him. And the other pilot is saying, what do you think of this weather? And he says, what? It's fine. He says, really, we've been in rain for 2 hours. Now, he should have said, I'm supposed to be on the same flight path as you, an hour behind you. I can't, one of us isn't where we think we are. An alert pilot would have said that. Instead, he said, huh, strange, right?
Yeah.
So you have those kinds, but you can just look at car accidents. You know, something like a third of all car accidents can be attributed to sleep loss. And you know, these are just, yeah.
Well, I'm about to say, would you say that like people should be more accountable on their sleep, or people should be held more accountable on it, or should it be more of a thing that society kind of displays in a sense? You know, they don't make that more of a thing that you should be doing. Especially during the pandemic, they didn't, like, no major presidential candidate, nobody like that said anything about getting healthy or losing weight. It was all about taking a medication or something like that. You go to a doctor, say you have trouble sleeping. I was prescribed sleep medication. I took it once. It messed me up I got an hour of sleep, and then I woke up and I was brain just groggy all day. I will never take it again. It was the worst thing. But melatonin, I mean, that's not necessarily bad, but I just think that there should be more of like a healthier process when it comes to things, rather than just shoving a pill. I mean, there's some pills that you need for medications or certain diseases that you have that you can't fix on your own. But when it comes to sleep, something that you can do, turning off your light. Like when I saw my nephew, he got a galaxy lamp for his room, those little cool things that show a galaxy on the ceiling. I was like, why would you do that? Like, I don't have these lights behind me in my room. They look cool, but they're not good when you're sleeping. Like they distract you. You don't want to go to bed. You rather look at the awesome galaxy that's being displayed on your ceiling.
Yeah. So two things you brought up. First of all, there is a whole process known as sleep hygiene, which is something you can do to change your behavior. And just Google sleep hygiene. You'll get this list of things that you should do behaviorally to get better sleep. There's a kind of CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. There's now CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is a therapeutic process that you can go through to, again, help you sleep better. So there are a lot of behavioral medicine approaches to better sleep. And it's partly laziness on the part of doctors, and it's partly what they have gotten used to expecting. Because most people go to the doctor and they say, well, you know, if you learn to go to bed at the same time every night and don't do any screens for an hour beforehand. And the patient tends to say, just give me a pill, because that's another cultural thing. We'll fix it with the pill. But you asked about responsibility, and I subscribe to the 200% blame theory. And the 200% blame theory says that you are 100% responsible for your actions, but society is also 100% responsible. You don't want to divvy it up 50-50, because then you both sort of sneak out of it.
Yeah.
You both sort of say it's the other one. But you're fully responsible for what you do. But so is the society. I mean, all the pressures, all the overt and covert processes that are used in advertising to get you, in essence, to buy what they want you to buy. But that might just mean they want you to click a few thousand more websites before you go to bed. All those things are driving your behavior, and it makes it harder. Makes it harder for you to behave the way, if you sat back and thought about it, you really want to behave. So you got to take responsibility, and we have to attack the society that promotes that bad behavior.
Bob, it was a pleasure talking with you, man. Is there a place where people can find any of your links? Twitter handle? Do you have a Twitter? I got to follow you on Twitter.
I have no Twitter. I don't even have
Good for you.
I don't even have a Facebook account.
Good for
I'm
you.
retrograde. But you can buy my book, When Brains Dream,
When brains dream.
and learn all about why we actually dream, what dreaming is for, and how our brain goes about constructing dreams. And then Matt Walker, former student of mine, has a book out called Why We Sleep, which has a lot of the rest of it about sleep in general.
Huh. I'll link it all in the description, your book link and Matt's book link as well too. It was a pleasure talking with you, Bob. I look forward to our next chat, man. I definitely got to have you
Thank
back
you,
on.
and get some sleep.
Yeah.